Welcome back to the deep dive. We've had a lot of requests to really dig into pre-Islamic Arabia, and today's the day we're going to do it.
Great.
We're using excerpts from a book called Rome, Persia, and Arabia, Shaping the Middle East from Pompey to Muhammad.
Oh, that's a fantastic book.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it, and I think it's going to be a really interesting deep dive for everyone. We're going to be looking at some, I think, really interesting questions, like how did the Roman and Persian empires, these massive empires, how does they interact with all the different Arab tribes and kingdoms?
Yeah.
And, we always hear about, nomadic raiders. Were all Arabs nomadic raiders? I don't know. What role did trade play? And, we also hear about the spread of Christianity. So we're going to be unpacking all of that and more.
Well, one of the most important things to realize about pre-Islamic Arabia is that it wasn't just some kind of waiting room for Islam. I mean, it was a vibrant and really dynamic period in and of itself.
Yeah. It's interesting. To help us unpack all this, we have, joining us is expert speaker. And they know a lot about this era, about this region. So I'm really excited to be chatting with them today.
I'm happy to be here.
So to kick things off, I think, we've got to address that stereotype, right? Pre-Islamic Arabia, land of, nomadic raiders roaming the desert.
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to understand is that the term Arab actually encompasses, a wide range of social structures.
Okay, so not just those, the sort of classic image of the guy on a camel with a sword roaming through the desert.
Right. I mean, yes, you had nomadic tribes, but you also had settled agriculturalists. You had skilled artisans. You had sophisticated urban centers. I mean, think, bustling marketplaces, impressive architecture, kingdoms. Arabia was much more of a mosaic than a monolith.
So not just endless deserts and camel caravans, were there cities?
Yeah. And, what's really interesting is that recent scholarship has really been overturning a lot of these old assumptions, fueled by new archaeological discoveries, translations of ancient inscriptions. I think we're really getting a much clearer picture of pre-Islamic Arabia's, diversity and the incredible achievements of the people there.
Yeah, it sounds like we're doing some myth busting today. Okay, so we've talked about that sort of broad, idea of Arabs in Arabia. Let's bring in those empires. I mean, how did Rome and Persia, how did they get involved in this complex world? What drew them to the region?
Yeah. Well, both of them had very strategic interests in Arabia, but their motivations were actually quite distinct.
Okay.
For Rome, it was really all about trade routes, those arteries carrying incredibly valuable goods like frankincense and myrrh.
Ah, those exotic scents.
Yes, exactly. From Arabia to the rest of the world.
So not just about, nice smells. I mean, these were important commodities, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, frankincense and myrrh were used in religious rituals, in medicine. They were luxury items. Controlling these trade routes meant controlling wealth and influence. And, Rome even launched expeditions into Arabia, trying to kind of exert their control. Although, that harsh desert landscape was definitely a challenge for them.
Ambition sort of clashing with the reality of the terrain. So, we've got Rome's economic interests. What about Persia? What were they doing?
Yeah, for Persia, under the Sasanian dynasty, is much more about expansion, consolidating power. They viewed Arabia as potential buffer zone against their rivals, the Byzantines. And they really wanted to control those key regions and trade routes.
So we've got these empires, and they're kind of vying for power. How did that impact, the Arab communities that were living there?
Well, I mean, it led to, military campaigns. You see shifting alliances, a constant jockeying for power and influence. But it wasn't just about conflict. This interplay also led to some fascinating cultural exchanges. There was a flow of religious influences going in all directions.
Yeah.
Really shaping the identity of the region.
A real melting pot. Is there a particular place, a particular story that really kind of captures this?
Yeah. We have to talk about Hatra. Hatra. It was a powerful Arab city that flourished, right between the Roman and Persian empires. It's a perfect example of this cultural and political complexity that we've been talking about.
Okay, what made it so unique?
Well, I mean, imagine a city where you find architectural elements blending Greek, Roman, Persian, and Arab traditions. You've got temples dedicated to a mix of Mesopotamian deities, Arab gods. You even find hints of Roman religious practices.
Wow, that's
Yeah, it
fascinating.
wasn't just about, aesthetics. It reflected the vibrant mix of people and beliefs that coexisted within Hatra.
A real crossroads. But we've been talking about these empires. So how did Hatra kind of fit into, the power struggles of the time?
Yeah. Well, Hatra actually managed to maintain a precarious independence for centuries.
Wow.
They even repelled Roman sieges thanks to their impressive fortifications.
Really?
But its location and its growing wealth eventually made it a target. It eventually fell to the Sasanians in the 3rd century CE.
A testament to how strong it was. But ultimately, yeah, those imperial ambitions. It makes me think about how fragile, independence can be when you're surrounded by big empires. And it also makes me think of what happened to Hatra in recent times, sadly.
Very sadly, yeah.
With ISIS.
In 2015, ISIS destroyed many of the remaining structures at Hatra. It's just a reminder of the vulnerability of cultural heritage,
Yeah.
Especially in these times of conflict.
Yeah. So we've been talking about empires and cities. What about the Arab tribes and their leaders? I mean, how did they navigate this world where you've got these massive empires? Were they just pawns in this game, or did they have any agency?
Oh, they definitely had agency.
Yeah.
Both empires, both Rome and Persia, they realized that they couldn't directly control this vastness of Arabia.
Right.
So they increasingly relied on Arab allies as buffer forces
Interesting.
and as intermediaries. They needed people who understood the complexities of the desert, the intricate, web of tribal allegiances.
So a shift from rule directly to rule through allies.
Exactly.
And how did this change things for the Arab tribes and their leaders?
Well, I mean, it led to the rise of some really powerful Arab figures.
Yeah.
They were called phylarchs.
Phylar.
Yeah, leaders of tribes or even confederations of tribes. And under Roman and Persian patronage, these phylarchs gained a significant amount of power. They were effectively, power brokers in their own right.
So instead of being dominated, they actually kind of thrived within the system. I bet there are some amazing stories about these figures in our source material.
Oh, absolutely. There's Al-Mandaros, for example. He was a Persian-allied Arab leader, really known for his military prowess. He was a key player in 6th century Middle Eastern politics, navigating, both Roman and Sasanian courts.
Al-Mandaros, a name to remember. What about on the Roman side? Were there any, equally impressive figures?
Oh, absolutely. We have Al-Harith. He was a Roman allied leader who was actually granted the titles of Patricios and King by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian.
Wow, those are big titles.
Yes.
He must have been doing something right. What kind of influence did he have?
Well, I mean, he was instrumental in Roman military campaigns. He played a key role in diplomatic missions. He was even involved in settling religious disputes.
Yeah.
His son, Al-Mundir, also rose to a position of power, very skillfully navigating, complex political and religious landscapes. These weren't just leaders following orders. They were shaping events.
Yeah. It's fascinating how, figures that we might think of as peripheral are actually these really central figures in this story.
Exactly.
So we've got these cultures, these leaders, these empires. What about religion? Christianity was spreading. How did that play out in this whole mix?
Yeah. Well, the spread of Christianity in Arabia was a complex process.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a, uniform wave of conversion.
Okay.
Different Arab groups responded in very different ways. You find everything from enthusiastic embrace to outright rejection.
So a real tapestry of responses.
Exactly. Shaped by local traditions, political allegiances, and, both Roman and Aksumite, that is Ethiopian, missionaries played a role.
So a lot of different influences at play.
Yeah. You see figures like Simeon the Stylite, whose reputation for piety drew Arab pilgrims, from all over. These individuals and their teachings had a profound impact on Arabia's, evolving religious landscape.
Okay. So we've got this religious landscape. It's in flux. Christianity spreading. Were there any particular Arab Christian communities that rose to prominence during this time?
Yeah, absolutely. One that stands out is Al-Hira.
Al-Hira.
It was a city within the Persian allied Lakhmid kingdom. It became a significant center of Arab Christianity, with churches, monasteries, and a growing Christian population.
So we see Christianity taking root, and it's interesting because, as we're exploring this world, it's tempting to think that there's this sharp break, before Islam and after Islam, but it sounds like there was a lot of continuity.
Absolutely. I mean, cultural, architectural, religious elements from pre-Islamic times continue to influence Arabian society for centuries.
So give us some examples. What are some of those legacies that kind of bridge that transition?
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus,
Yeah.
one of the most important mosques in Islamic history. It was built on a site that was previously occupied by Roman and Christian structures.
Yeah.
You literally have layers of religious history.
Wow, that's amazing.
And even after the rise of Islam, you still see Christian and Jewish communities, continuing to exist.
Yeah.
Showcasing that religious diversity that characterized early Islamic societies.
It's like those different layers of history just kind of built one upon another. And I think it really emphasizes how much understanding pre-Islamic Arabia helps us understand the Middle East today.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It provides context, nuance, and a deeper appreciation for the historical forces that continue to shape the region.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground, and we've really only just scratched the surface. We've talked about Arabia being this crossroads of empires, these Arab leaders, the changing religious landscape. And in our next deep dive, we're going to focus specifically on some of those Arab statesmen, those figures who really knew how to play the game of power.
Yes.
They were masters of diplomacy, military strategy, political maneuvering, and their stories, I think, offer just these fascinating insights into the dynamics of this world.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned for that. We'll pick up right where we left off in our next deep dive into pre-Islamic Arabia.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're picking up right where we left off, continuing our exploration of pre-Islamic Arabia.
A fascinating period that challenges those simplistic narratives we often hear.
Absolutely. So much more than just, deserts and nomads. We talked about bustling cities, powerful Arab leaders, the spread of Christianity. But now, let's zoom in on a specific period, the 6th century CE.
The 6th century. A real turning point. All those forces we've been discussing, clashing empires, shifting alliances, new ideas, they really come to a head in this century.
And it's the century where those Arab statesmen, those super phylarchs, really step onto the world stage, right?
Absolutely. They go from, tribal leaders to major players in this struggle between the Byzantines and the Sasanians, wielding incredible power and influence.
So Arabia wasn't just caught in the crossfire. These Arab leaders were actually shaping events.
Exactly. They become essential allies for both sides, both the Byzantines and the Sasanians. And they use this position, this leverage, to secure resources, expand their territories, even influence imperial policies.
Wow. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. They were playing the game, weren't they? Real masters of real politics.
Oh, absolutely. They understood that both empires needed them, and they used that to their advantage. Their stories, I think, are just amazing. They give us this window into the world of diplomacy, warfare, all the religious maneuvering that was going on.
It's like a high-stakes game of chess with these Arab leaders making strategic moves.
Okay, let's start with Al-Harith. He was the Byzantine allied super phylarch, right? What were some of his big achievements?
Well, Al-Harith's rise to power is really incredible. He was a brilliant military leader, securing crucial victories for the Byzantines against the Sasanians. He was instrumental in maintaining Byzantine influence along that eastern frontier.
So a real warrior defending the border, but he was more than just a military leader, right?
Oh, yeah, much more. He was a master diplomat. He negotiated treaties, he forged alliances, he mediated disputes between rival Arab tribes. I mean, he was really essential for keeping that whole region stable, which, as you can imagine, wasn't easy.
Yeah, a real linchpin. Are there any stories, any events that really capture his skills, as a diplomat, as a politician?
Well, there's this one incident that really shows his ability to handle, a very delicate situation. Remember the Monophysites, that Christian sect that was often at odds with the Byzantine emperors? Yeah. The group that Al-Harith's son, Al-Mundir, was such a strong supporter of.
Exactly. Well, in the 540s, a serious conflict erupts between the Monophysites and the Chalcedonians, the officially recognized Christian sect in the Byzantine Empire. And this feud, it really threatened to destabilize the whole region.
So not only is he dealing with, the Byzantines and the Sasanians, now he's got to wade into this religious dispute.
Right. But Al-Harith understands how important it is to maintain unity, to keep the peace. So he steps in to mediate.
Wow. So what does he do? How does he bring these two sides together?
Well, he's able to, navigate all those complex theological arguments. He appeals to both sides to reconcile, and he ultimately persuades them to find some common ground.
Wow, he prevents a potential civil war.
He does, and, he earns praise from both Monophysites and Emperor Justinian himself.
That's impressive. So it seems like he was really good at finding those win-win solutions, bridging those divides. But even for someone like Al-Harith, I imagine it couldn't always be smooth sailing in the Byzantine world.
You're absolutely right. Al-Harith's loyalty was tested on a number of occasions. He was constantly negotiating his position, balancing, his obligations to the empire with the interests of his tribe and the Arab community as a whole.
It's a tough balancing act. Are there any incidents that really stand out where his loyalty was put to the test?
Yeah. There's this one in 541 CE. The Sasanians launch a major raid into Syria, and Emperor Justinian calls on Al-Harith for military support.
Okay.
But Al-Harith hesitates. He demands greater autonomy, greater control over Arab troops before he'll commit to the campaign.
He's playing hardball. That's risky. I mean, defying the emperor, what could happen?
Well, Justinian, he was known for being very strong-willed. He was furious.
I bet.
But he also recognized that Al-Harith was a crucial ally. He knew that if he alienated him, it could really jeopardize Byzantine interests in the region.
Right.
So he backs down. He gives Al-Harith the concessions he's asking for.
Wow. A strategic compromise. So it seems like these Arab leaders really understood their leverage, their position in this larger struggle between these empires.
Absolutely. They knew how much the Byzantines and the Sasanians needed them, and they weren't afraid to use that.
So Al-Harith, he was a powerful figure, he was shrewd, he was successful, but this delicate balance, it couldn't last forever, could it?
Unfortunately not. Al-Harith's power, his influence, it just kept growing. And his assertive stance, well, it started to raise suspicions in the Byzantine court.
Uh-oh. Rumors and whispers start swirling.
Exactly. And Justinian, he might have started fearing a potential rebellion. So he decides to act.
Okay. What does he do?
In 547 CE, he summons Al-Harith to Constantinople.
Yeah.
Supposedly to discuss important matters. But when Al-Harith arrives, he's arrested, imprisoned on charges of treason.
A classic setup. Lured in and then betrayed. So is that it for Al-Harith?
Luckily, no. Al-Harith, being the resourceful leader that he is, manages to escape.
He escapes. Come on, that's amazing. Tell me more. How did he pull that off?
Well, the details are a bit murky, but we know that he had some loyal supporters who helped him flee Constantinople and get back to Arabia.
Back to his power base. So what does he do? Does he try to rebuild?
He does, but the relationship with the Byzantines is, shattered. He doesn't trust Justinian anymore. He spends his remaining years consolidating his power in Arabia, and he even starts exploring, potential alliances with the Sasanians.
Wow. A complete flip. He goes from being this key Byzantine ally to potentially siding with their enemy. It shows you how quickly things could change, how personal these betrayals could be.
Yeah, a real reminder of that constant tension, between cooperation and competition.
Yeah.
These Arab leaders, they were walking a very, very fine line.
Okay, so we've talked about Al-Harith, the Byzantine-backed leader. Let's switch gears and talk about Alomendaros, his counterpart in the Sasanian sphere. What was he like as a leader?
Alomendaros. Oh, he was something else. He was in many ways the classic warrior king, known for his courage, his military skills. He was absolutely relentless in pursuing his tribe's interests, even when those interests clashed with, his Sasanian patrons.
A bold, ambitious figure, not afraid to make enemies.
Not at all. There's this one episode, a raid he leads into Byzantine territory in 529. He takes a force of Arab horsemen, goes deep into Byzantine Syria. They pillage towns, disrupt trade routes. They even defeat a Byzantine army.
Wow, a major victory. I bet that didn't go over well in Constantinople.
Oh, they were furious. Justinian, he couldn't let that stand. He sends a much larger force led by Belisarius, the famous Byzantine general.
Belisarius. That's setting the stage for a real clash of the Titans. So what happens?
Well, it wasn't the victory that Justinian was hoping for. Alomendaros, even though he's outnumbered, he uses his knowledge of the desert. He outmaneuvers Belisarius, avoids a direct confrontation, and leads his forces back to Sasanian territory.
So a strategic retreat. He preserves his forces, but he still inflicts a blow to Byzantine prestige. Not bad.
Exactly. And, this raid, it actually strengthens his position with the Sasanians. They see his value.
But they must have also been a little nervous, right? I mean, this is a guy who just defeated a Byzantine army.
Oh, absolutely. They were both impressed and wary. They realized he could be a powerful ally, but also a potential rival if he got too powerful.
So a double-edged sword. That's interesting. It sounds like his relationship with the Sasanians was always a bit tense.
It was. He was always pushing the boundaries. He wanted to expand his tribe's power, even if it meant challenging Sasanian authority. And that led to a lot of friction.
So this constant power struggle, were there any particular incidents where this tension really came to the surface?
Yeah, in the early 540s, Kavad the Thirst, the Sasanian king, he does something really unexpected. He orders Alamandaros to convert to Christianity.
Wait, what? The Sasanian king wants his Arab ally to convert to Christianity.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, remember how we talked about Kavad trying to, strengthen ties with the Byzantines? He thought that if they shared a faith, it might, help bring them closer, maybe even undermine Byzantine influence in the region.
Right, right. That attempt to use religion as a diplomatic tool, but asking a powerful Arab leader to just abandon his beliefs, that's a bold move. What did Al-Mandara say?
He refused. He wasn't going to give up his traditions, his cultural identity, just like that.
He stood his ground? What happened? Did Kavad just let it go?
Oh no, he was furious. He threw Alamandaros in prison.
Wow. That's a high price to pay for sticking to your beliefs. So what happened to Alamandaros? Did he change his mind?
Well, eventually he was released. Kavad realized he still needed him. He was too valuable as a military leader. But this whole experience, it really soured the relationship. Alamandaros never forgot that betrayal.
You can understand why. He was in prison for his beliefs.
Yeah. And, from that point on, he's much more cautious. He's still loyal to the Sasanians, but he's also much more strategic in his dealings with them. He always has that experience in the back of his mind.
So Alamandaros, he's this brilliant military leader, a shrewd political operator, a survivor. He navigates this complex world with real skill.
He does. And his story, like Al-Arith's, shows us that these Arab leaders, they were not just puppets of the empires. They were active participants, shaping events, pushing their own agendas.
Okay, so we've talked about these larger-than-life figures operating on this grand stage, but I'm curious, what about everyday life in 6th century Arabia? What was it like for ordinary people? What were their lives like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, our understanding of daily life back then, it's still evolving. Scholars are, piecing together clues from archaeological finds, inscriptions, chronicles, whatever they can find.
It's like a giant puzzle, and we're still putting the pieces together. So based on what we know, what can we say about Arabian society in this period?
Well, it was a very vibrant society, very diverse, shaped by tradition, by change, by all those external influences we've been talking about. It was a society in transition, grappling with, globalization, new ideas, the pressures from these powerful empires.
A sense of change in the air. What were some of the key features of Arabian society back then?
Well, one of the most important was the role of tribal structures. Arabian society was organized around kinship groups. Loyalty to your tribe, that was paramount. It gave people a sense of identity, belonging, security in a world that often felt very chaotic.
So the tribe as the bedrock of social and political life. But the 6th century, it was a period of change, right? Did these tribal structures adapt?
They did. We see with those superphylarchs, tribal alliances get woven into these broader political and military alliances. Arab leaders, they're trying to expand their power, so they forge alliances with multiple tribes. They create these larger confederations that could even challenge the empires.
So tribalism as a building block for larger power structures.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about politics and military. These confederations, they also fostered cultural exchange. Ideas, technologies, religious beliefs, they spread across the peninsula.
It's fascinating, this mix of continuity and change. What about religion? I mean, we've talked about Christianity spreading. Were there other faiths, other beliefs that were important in this society?
Oh, absolutely. Christianity, yes, it was growing, especially in the cities and among certain tribes allied with the Romans. But those traditional polytheistic beliefs, the worship of those ancient Arabian deities, that was still very strong, especially in the more remote areas.
So a real mix of beliefs. Were there any particular deities or religious practices that were, especially widespread?
Yeah, one of the most important deities was Allah, a god associated with the heavens and with destiny. And, while the name Allah would later become synonymous with Islam in the 6th century, it was actually used by both polytheists and those early followers of monotheistic faiths.
Oh, interesting. So the concept of Allah predates Islam. Were there other important deities in this pre-Islamic pantheon?
Oh, yeah, many. Each tribe often had its own patron deity, and there were, regional deities associated with certain places or natural phenomena. 3 goddesses, Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, they were very popular, often invoked for protection and prosperity.
A whole pantheon of gods and goddesses. What about religious practices? Were there any rituals, any ceremonies that were, common across Arabian society?
Yeah, pilgrimages were very important. People would travel sometimes for long distances to visit sacred sites, offer sacrifices, participate in communal rituals. And these pilgrimages, they weren't just religious obligations, they were social events, opportunities to trade, to reinforce those tribal and communal bonds.
It's like a chance to connect with something larger than yourself.
Exactly.
Were there any pilgrimage sites that were particularly important?
Oh, yeah. One of the most important was the Kaaba in Mecca.
The Kaaba.
It was a cube-shaped structure believed to house idols representing various deities, and it drew people from all over Arabia. It was a place where, different tribes, different beliefs, they all came together.
It's amazing to think that the Kaaba, which would become the holiest site in Islam, was already such an important place in pre-Islamic times. It's like you can see those connections, those continuities between the past and the future.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the empires, the Arab leaders, the religious landscape. But as we move deeper into the 6th century, we're getting closer to the emergence of Islam. What were some of the key factors that created the conditions for this new faith to emerge, to take root?
Well, as we've seen, 6th century Arabia was a time of great upheaval. The Byzantines and Sasanians, they were locked in this endless struggle. Arabia was right in the middle.
Right, that power vacuum, that constant struggle. But how did that impact, the everyday lives of people?
Imagine living in a world where empires are constantly vying for control, where trade routes are disrupted, where, your whole way of life is being challenged. People were looking for stability, for security, for a sense of belonging. They wanted a way to make sense of this world that felt increasingly chaotic.
So a real yearning for something new, something that could provide meaning and order in this chaotic world.
Exactly. And, the spread of monotheistic ideas, especially through Christianity and Judaism, that also had a big impact. These faiths, with their emphasis on one God, on a moral code, they offered a different way of understanding the world.
So the seeds of monotheism were already there, offering an alternative to those traditional polytheistic beliefs.
Right. But there were also those internal dynamics within Arabian society that were important. The rise of Mecca as this center of trade and pilgrimage that created a hub where ideas and people from all over Arabia could come together.
Mecca, a real melting pot, a crossroads of cultures and faiths.
Exactly. And in that kind of environment, new ideas could take root, spread, and, really challenge the old ways of thinking.
So we have this convergence of factors. The power vacuum, the yearning for stability, the spread of monotheistic ideas, and this vibrant cosmopolitan city. It's like all the ingredients are there for something new, something transformative to emerge.
And that something new would be Islam, a faith that would profoundly change Arabia and the world. But that's the story for our next deep dive.
Oh, a cliffhanger. I can't wait to delve into the rise of Islam and its impact on Arabia and the world. But for now, we'll have to leave our listeners in suspense. Join us next time as we explore the origins and the legacy of this world-changing faith. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of pre-Islamic Arabia, and we've seen a lot, right? I mean, from the clash of empires to the rise of those powerful Arab leaders to the spread of Christianity, but now it's time to really get to the event that changed everything, the rise of Islam.
It's a story that starts in the early 7th century CE in Mecca, that bustling center of trade, pilgrimage, and all those diverse religious ideas we talked about. And at the heart of the story is a man named Muhammad, born into the Quraysh tribe. He was known for his honesty, his integrity, and his really deep concern for the social injustices he saw all around him.
Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, it's a story everyone's heard of, but, it's often told in a way that's kind of shrouded in myth and in different interpretations. So what can you tell us about his early life and how he came to be a prophet?
Well, Muhammad was really troubled by the state of Meccan society. Yes, it was this place of economic prosperity, a hub for trade and cultural exchange, but it was also a place where wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of just a few. Tribal rivalries were rampant, and the exploitation of the poor and the vulnerable was really widespread.
So those classic tensions, right, between rich and poor, the powerful and the powerless, it sounds like it was creating a lot of social unrest.
Yeah, exactly. And Muhammad, with his strong sense of justice and compassion, it really got to him. He would often retreat to a cave outside of Mecca just to meditate and think about the state of his society and the spiritual emptiness he felt everywhere.
a search for meaning in a world that felt out of balance. And it was during one of these retreats that he had this profound experience, right? This life-changing event.
Yeah, in the 610 CE, while he was meditating in the cave, Muhammad received his first revelation from God. It was delivered through the angel Gabriel, and this was just the beginning. These revelations continued for 23 years, and they formed the basis of the Quran, the holy book of Islam.
The Quran, a book that has influenced billions of people. So what was the main message of these revelations? What was God telling Muhammad?
The core message was a call to monotheism, the belief in one God, Allah. And that was a pretty radical idea at the time. You know, it went against the polytheistic beliefs that were dominant in Arabia. So Muhammad was told to reject the worship of idols and to preach submission to the will of the one true God.
That's a bold message, you know, going up against the whole system, the whole way of life in Mecca. And we talked about how important idol worship was to the Meccan elite. It was tied to their power, their wealth. So I'm guessing they weren't too happy about this.
Oh yeah, they saw Muhammad's teaching as a direct threat to their power, to everything they held dear. They mocked him. They said he was crazy. They tried to discredit him.
That's what happens when you challenge the status quo. So who were Muhammad's first converts? Who was drawn to this message?
Well, his message really resonated with those who felt marginalized, the ones who felt oppressed by the system. A lot of his early followers were from the lower classes, the poor, the enslaved people who had been excluded from power.
A message of hope for those who had been pushed to the margin. So it's not just a new religion, it's a social movement, a call for a more just world. And I bet that didn't sit well with the Meccan elite either.
You got it. The elites saw this growing Muslim community as a threat to their whole way of life. So as more people joined, the persecution got worse.
That's how power works, right? They'll do whatever it takes to hold on to it. So how did they persecute the Muslims?
Economic boycotts, they ostracized them, violence, imprisonment. They even tortured and killed some of Muhammad's followers just because they wouldn't give up their faith.
Wow, that's heavy. But even with all of that, the Muslim community kept growing. How did they survive under that kind of pressure?
They had this incredible resilience. They found strength in their faith, their shared belief in Muhammad's message. And the strong community they had built, they supported each other, shared what little they had, and they refused to back down even when they were in danger.
That's the power of belief and community. It's really inspiring. But things got so bad they couldn't stay in Mecca, right?
Yeah, it just wasn't safe anymore. So in 622 CE swept, Muhammad and his followers decided to leave Mecca. They migrated to a city called Yathrib, which would later be renamed Medina. This migration is called the Hijra, and it marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. It's a major turning point in Islamic history.
The Hijra, a journey of faith, a flight to safety, the start of a new chapter. So what was it like for them in Medina?
Medina was different from Mecca. It was more diverse. It had a big Jewish population and lots of different Arab tribes that were often fighting with each other. And a lot of them saw Muhammad as a leader who could bring peace to the city.
So he comes to Medina not just as a prophet, but as a peacemaker, someone who can unite these different groups.
Exactly. And that's what he did. He established a community based on the principles of Islam, a community where justice, compassion, and mutual respect were really important. He even created a constitution for Medina outlining the rights and responsibilities of everyone, regardless of their religion.
Wow. So he's building a new kind of society, one that goes beyond those old tribal and religious divisions. That's incredible. But I'm guessing the Meccans weren't just going to let them go and live in peace, were they?
No, they weren't. They saw the Muslims in Medina as a threat to their power, their control over the region. So the tension kept building, and eventually it boiled over into war.
The clash between the old order and the new.
Wow.
So what were some of the key battles in this conflict?
Well, one of the first was the Battle of Badr in 624 CE, and the Muslims won a decisive victory, even though they were totally outnumbered. And a lot of people saw this as a sign from God, you know, a sign that they were on the right side.
A victory against the odds, but, you know, in war things change. Do the Meccans just give up after this?
No, they don't. A year later, there's the Battle of Uhud, and this time the Muslims suffered a setback. It's a reminder that this is going to be a long and difficult struggle.
Ups and downs. That's how it always goes when you're fighting for something new.
So how did this conflict between Mecca and Medina finally end?
Well, in 630 CE, Muhammad and his followers, they returned to Mecca, but this time they weren't refugees, they were conquerors. A triumphant return. But how did the Meccans react? Did they fight back?
Actually, no. They surrendered without a fight. And what Muhammad did next really surprised people. He offered amnesty to everyone who had opposed him.
Wow, that's powerful. He chooses forgiveness instead of revenge. It's an amazing example of leadership. What was he thinking?
I think Muhammad understood that real lasting change doesn't come from violence or revenge. It comes from building a society that's united, and just he wanted to heal those old wounds and bring everyone together under Islam, not by force, but through compassion and understanding.
That's such a powerful message, and it's still relevant today. So, with the conquest of Mecca, Muhammad was now in a position to really transform Arabia. What were some of the key changes he made?
One of the biggest was the transformation of the Kaaba, that ancient shrine that had been a center of polytheism for centuries. All the idols were removed, and it became the holiest site in Islam, the destination for the Hajj pilgrimage.
A physical change that symbolized this huge transformation that was happening across Arabia. And what about the Meccans, those people who had opposed him? Did they convert to Islam?
A lot of them. Did you know Muhammad's message of forgiveness and the growing influence of Islam convinced a lot of people, and even those who maybe didn't fully convert, they still accepted the new order and became part of this new Muslim society.
So a mix of conversion and integration. It's amazing how quickly things can change sometimes. And Muhammad continued to lead the Muslim community, right?
He did. He received more revelations, which were compiled into the Quran. He established laws and institutions to govern the community, and he worked really hard to spread Islam's message across Arabia.
What a legacy. So when Muhammad died in 632 CE, he left behind a unified Arabia, a community united by faith, and a set of ideas that would change the world.
His death was a huge loss, but he had built something really powerful, and the story of Islam was just beginning.
Because what happened next was pretty incredible. Islam spread beyond Arabia with amazing speed, and it transformed the world.
It's one of the most remarkable stories in history.
Absolutely. But before we get to that, I think it's important to step back and think about what we've learned about pre-Islamic Arabia. It wasn't some empty period just waiting for Islam to come along. It was this vibrant, complex world, a real crossroads of cultures and empires.
Right. It was a dynamic place where powerful ideas took root and changed everything.
And it reminds us that history is never simple. It's messy, it's full of surprises, and it's the actions of individuals that shape the course of events.
And those individual stories, those are often the most interesting ones.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into pre-Islamic Arabia. I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope this has inspired you to keep learning about this fascinating period of history.
Me too. There's so much more to discover.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep diving deep.